Welcome everybody to another episode of my podcast, and today, as all my guests know, I'm still delighted, always delighted to have the brilliant Dominic de Mariveles. Dominic I've known for a long time, shaped some of my career, might I say, within professional services, but he's a veteran within kind of business development, marketing across professional services last 20 years, and currently doing some consulting in between projects. So I thought, who better to get on and talk about, from our perspective, what we believe, or what's next for business development in professional services. So Dominic, I always start my podcast like this with a who, what, why, when, where. You want to give a bit of a backstory, and then I know that you certainly have a view on this, so I'm looking forward to where this goes.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. Delighted to be asked on and have another conversation, as we used to have many years ago over a coffee in the office. So Dominic de Mariveles. So I've worked in professional services BD since the early 2000s, actually. I think since 2000, so quite a long time. I started out working in the Big Four at KPMG and Deloitte in client-facing sales roles that were very new back then, and have continued that really throughout my career. I've spent 10 years in accountancy, then another 10 years in law at BCLP, where of course our paths crossed, Alex, heading up the BD efforts there. And then also after that, joined a fund administrator, Crestbridge, a few years ago. So I've done a few years in fund administration, which again is just another variant on professional services. So been a really interesting career, always focused on BD, professional services, both in London and globally. So hopefully, we probably have some small things to talk about. And as ever is, I'm relatively opinionated, so everyone will find out soon enough.
Indeed, and that's fundamentally when I made the move from actually PwC into law. The reason I joined BLP as was because you went through the merger with Brian Cave, whenever that was, a number of years ago, is that BLP back then was one of the very few roles out in the market where it was a client-facing BD role, and having come from a client-facing BD role in PwC, I didn't want to lose that side of things. So maybe something we can build on. But from your perspective, if we just take a step back, what is, and this may sound like an incredibly stupid question, but what is business development in the context of professional services?
So business development in professional services is very simple. It is the art of increasing the top line for the company by getting in new clients and new business. And it's as simple as that. It's increasing revenues, which is a nice, simple aim to have. How you can get there can be relatively complicated, but the aim of it is very simple.
And I like the way they use that. I like that, the art of getting in new clients and new business. And I guess that could be new clients from within an existing client base, as well as obviously net new logos within your defined markets that you want to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do get that split. You get that split between new business, effectively, which is new clients new to the firm, and new existing, which is new work from existing clients. And that's really the key split. And historically, there's been this big focus on the new existing, and quite rightly, because all the studies that we've read over donkey's years now say how much easier it is to get work from your current clients than the new clients, which is all well and good, and it's all absolutely true, and that's definitely the right focus. But the new actually for me has always been a little bit more interesting, because one, it's much harder. Two, it requires some more investment and some focus, and it requires slightly different skills. And so I think within professional services, what I've noticed is that you can have key client programs and talk about how to do new existing, but partners at all of these sorts of firms and senior executives at all of these sorts of firms, they know these people, they know their clients, they know their clients' business. They're not that receptive to being told what to do with people that they've known for 15, 20 years, even if actually they do have some new tricks to learn, and that they're not that receptive to it. And also generally, they can manage that. The new side is more interesting because it's very, very out of the comfort zone of your typical partner at a law firm or accountancy firm or fund manager, whatever it might be. That's really quite out of their comfort zone, and they need a lot more support with that. And that's also an area of the business that, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about as this goes on. It's an area of the business that's changed radically in the past 20 years in terms of how you would access that market and how you approach the new market.
And so, building on that, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, and seen it firsthand with trying to bring somebody who's got that deep relationship with a person or a few people across an organization to do something sort of fundamentally different is no kind of easy feat. And I guess this comes back to that word that you probably use specifically in terms of the art. What is the role then of the individual in an organization that is in a BD function historically? What do they have to do in order to be able to facilitate that? And then where I want to take this is, what does the new world order look like for BD and professional services? But let's kind of look back initially to hopefully inform where we think this should be.
Yeah, so this is quite a sort of esoteric idea, but really what BD is doing, in order to grow the top line, as I said, really what it is a form of risk management. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that you get an existing client, for example, and a person, a senior partner, and she's leading that client. Does she want to ask difficult questions to the client about new work in new jurisdictions or new service lines, people maybe she doesn't know within her own firm? Maybe they're in different offices, they're in different practice groups. She doesn't really know them. Does she really want to risk her relationship that maybe is worth 7 figures a year and really sees her through year to year? Does she really want to risk that for something new that, and again, she may or may not be remunerated super well on that, which is another topic to come back to. So the risk appetite of those people is quite low. And the same on the new side, I would say, is that what happens is you've got people who are trained lawyers, trained accountants, they're not trained salespeople, making cold calls. I had a job when I was 24 to cold call CEOs of 100 companies. Luckily, I was pretty good at it, but it was quite a horrific thing to come in the office and that's what you had to do. And if you weren't successful at it, goodbye. Yeah, it was really tough. And that's not what mid professionals who are in their late 20s, early 30s really want to do. And actually, the way the culture's changed, social media and stuff will come to, they're even less likely to want to do that now than they were a few years ago, because that whole cold calling thing is probably long gone by now, really, in terms of professional setting. So again, it's increasing the risk appetite of people to do new things, to go to events, to speak to new clients, to reach out to people relatively cold by a variety of means that we'll talk about, and increase their risk appetite for taking a bit of risk. On the new side, is the sort of risk of people saying no and not being interested, and that sort of shame type feeling that you slightly get of rejection. Mm-hmm. And on the new existing side, it's upsetting the apple cart of something that's serving you very well, thank you very much. So it's both. It's really convincing people that they're not taking as much risk as they think they are, that by making these actions, the huge benefits outweigh the small risks that they're doing. So it's quite, as I say, it's quite an emotional piece doing business development. But I do think of it in those risks, or I've learned to think of it in those risk terms, because if you don't have empathy for the people you're trying to convince to do it, then nothing happens. And I've seen so many programs fail. I've seen so many projects fail. I've seen so many senior people come in from sales roles from BT or EE or other large industry sectors who know all about running sales teams, who know all about sales processes, far more than I do, frankly. And they come in and they try and make these things work, and they leave within a year and a half, absolutely guaranteed, without fail. Not seen any of them really succeed, because they don't understand the need to get everybody on board in a partnership environment. They don't understand, they can't really grasp the lack of risk appetite that people have within these environments, and quite deservedly so. When you look at these firms, most of them have been around for 150 years plus, doing very well, thank you very much, with a long history of very happy, retired partners in Tunbridge Wells, and that's what so many of them aspire to.
There are other places that our retired partners could live in the UK.
I was thinking somewhere close to myself. So I'm being very partial there.
I think that's a really interesting, fascinating way to, fascinating, can those be in the same sentence? That's a really interesting way to look at it, that you are helping, manage the risk in terms of the risk to the individual and the relationship, which is, to your point, it is an art form. And it's interesting, certainly from my journey into professional services, that 15 or so people from recruitment moved into PwC and seem to gel very well into that world, because you're managing risk for people, and you're managing risk for people to change, changing roles, which potentially could change their entire career, their entire kind of outlook on life. And fundamentally, you are dealing with people whose job is to help clients manage risk, typically on the more the leaner side rather than the more aggressive side. So to that end, and this is me speaking from experience of spending 5 years as an independent, being that kind of outsider looking in, your experience across other industries and now being that outsider looking in, why do we believe, or why do we think that there's now just such a diverse perception of what BD is within a professional service firm? And I use the example when, working with clients historically, you could ask a partner in a firm the same question, what do you believe BD does? And you'll probably get 100 different responses, all very different in terms of their view. And some of them maybe not even anything related to increasing the top line. So why do we believe we are now where we are today around that? And is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, Alex. And I think it's quite a difficult one to answer. There's a few things there. I think obvious one is BD is such a catch-all term that it can co-opt so many things. The whole of marketing can fit under BD in the same way that you could fit BD under marketing. Yep. People who aren't experienced in the nuances of it happily do that, merrily do that, without really thinking about the differences at all or understanding the differences, which leads to a bit of confusion. So one is a kind of lack of understanding on the part of the practitioners. But I think also because the way BD works is very individual, different people have different skill sets. Some people, some partners are extremely technical and experts in their fields, and effectively the clients hire them because they're massive brain boxes and they can deliver the answers that the client wants, and the client believes that probably only they can, and they're willing to pay that because they want someone really clever to answer their questions for them. And then you've got people who are totally different personality types. They're very empathetic, or they actually love going to events and speaking at events and meeting new people and networking and interacting. And they may or not be a particularly good accountant or lawyer, but that doesn't stop them because they're out there and they love interacting with people, and people maybe love them back. And they build their book of business and their credibility in the industry that way. So one of the challenges with BD is it's quite a personal thing. How you do it. I think you and I have worked together, and you and I have quite different styles about how we go about doing our BD. And we're both very experienced professionals, and that's because how you do it always comes from a personal place of your own sort of personality types and your own approach to how much risk that you want to take in your sort of daily life in terms of reaching out to people. And so that leads to everybody having their own personal definition of it, which then goes back to your question. Everyone thinks very differently about it. Like, well, yeah, they do, because they can't help but put their own stamp from what they think that they would like to do, or they enjoy doing, or they hate doing, and they don't want to do, both ways, into what they think this kind of miasma of the phrase of BD is. And actually, when you think of it from that perspective, we won't really get away from that, certainly not in our lifetimes. We won't really escape that in a way that a corporate can escape it by having a sales team, a sales process, direct responsibility for the top line for their sales team, and a culture of sales within that team that is supported by other groups in a business. It's just so different because you have people who are purely dedicated to the role. You won't ever get that in professional services in the same way. You're not going to see professional services firms, much as you and I might like it. You won't see professional services firms, just allocate all the BD to a sales team. There'll always be a support team. So because of that model, we have this complexity about what BD can mean in professional services.
And to your point, is that it depends on where it sits, can also direct the skill sets that are hired. If I look at, and we've worked with a plethora of people in BD from all different industries and backgrounds. Some have never sold in their lives, and that's not to say that they shouldn't be in a role that that has BD on the badge, but it's the need and the want and reacting to the requirements, dare I say, of the organization at that time, or specifically the individual that the person will be working with or practice group based on the skill sets of that person. So it could be that you need somebody who's more akin to developing proposals and bids, or somebody who's more akin to developing the social media strategy, or somebody who's more akin to the hard-nosed cold calling type sort of approach. And you're right, whilst the partnership exists in the way that it does at the moment, I can't see them having that dedicated sales function. But would that even be right? I don't know. And I guess that then leads on to, if you and I were to start a firm today, God forbid we start a professional service firm, there's a scary thought. But how would, or what skill sets would we look for across that BD spectrum to help drive the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? And let's go far and wide already out there with this.
Yeah, so I think one thing where I see the errors made currently, and they have been rectified over the past few years, but where the errors are is there is not enough depth in many of the teams that you would need for the reasons that you say. I think particularly at small firms, kind of totally understandably, they have smaller budgets, they have smaller teams, they often go for a kind of jack of all trades style of person, and you meet these very harassed ladies and gentlemen who are trying to do PR, events, comms, bids, networking stuff, some partner training, internal budgets and cost control around budgets, throwing out some sort of digital angles and managing the web. And they then have a team of 2 or 3 or 4 people under them who all try and muck in. And they have quite a fun job. I think that's why many of them enjoy it. They have quite a fun job because they are doing 20 different things, and each day is different because each day there's a new crisis with something they forgot about from 3 months ago that suddenly they probably should have done. So they do have. It's quite a fun job because it's but that lack of specialism means that not a lot of extra value is created. Like all the day-to-day hygiene stuff does get done very successfully by those teams. But they do struggle to add real value. And then that feeds back into the partners and more senior people in the firm going, well, what do these people really do? And we're not really going to listen to them. And they're not really telling us anything that we can't do ourselves. And that's because they're busy doing, they're just busy doing the hygiene all day, every day. And they struggle. So I think smaller firms have an issue. If we were to start a bigger firm, I think that centers of excellence kind of approach is really, really key. I think particularly in the digital sphere, but also across the business. You need dedicated people writing RFPs. I've run teams doing RFPs at 3-4 different firms now, and by focusing on it and by having people dedicated to it and by having some proper process, and it's not that complicated, but it's a little bit complicated, some proper process. At every single firm that I've ever done it at, I've improved the RFP success rate from normally around 30-35 to more like 50%. And it's not that hard, but the challenge has been the same every time. A couple of people doing RFPs on the side of the desk, maybe one dedicated person, no real process about what we should or shouldn't take, no real storage of the data, no ability to recast that, no real control over the pricing element because it's sat with too many different people, and lots of problems with branding and international firms and stuff like that, and how things went out, all sorts of issues. But actually relatively simply fixed by having enough people dedicated, or enough resources dedicated to that particular function. And exactly the same applies to the marketing function, to the events function, to the PR function. Obviously, you have to scale everything relative to the investment that you can have in the firm as a whole, and the investment that you might have in your marketing function, which is typically too low in a professional services firm, as we all know. PwC reports, always like, oh, you should have 3 to 5%, 5% being pretty high, and typically most firms I know of are spending, 2.5 to 3.5 tops. So they're all relatively underspending in this area because they can get away with it. The finance director loves a bit of free cash backs at the end of the year. But I think those centres of excellence are just so key. Having enough people and hiring, therefore, people who have specific dedicated skills, experience in doing one or two things very, very well. Because when you have someone who maybe does come from an agency background, who is given a bit of a license in your marketing team on the branding side and the Marcom side, you see fantastic things come out. It's really, really impressive campaigns, really, really differential stuff that these firms really want. But you can't hire that person and give them all the hygiene stuff to do as well, because they won't come out with any campaigns. They'll just drown in the day-to-day. So you have to have enough headspace to do it. And then I guess if you're a small or a medium firm, you have to take some bets on where to invest, because you probably can't afford to have 6 or 8 heads in 6 or 8 different areas, and there we are with 50 people, and you haven't got 50 FTEs in your team, you've got 30. So you have to take some bets, and that's really where I come back to the digital space. Where are you going to take your bets? Where are you really going to do it, and where are you going to make the difference? I think the interesting thing overall, though, is that very, very few of the firms take one of those bets on the actual real BD side, on the new business side, on the attracting the top line, because it's probably the most risky side. It's hard to find the people. You have to get a lot of cultural engagement to make it work. But when it does work, it really makes a difference to the top and bottom line of the firm. So it justifies the marketing teams, the BD teams. They get bigger budgets, the firm grows. It's fantastic. But you rarely see that bet taken, because it's out of the comfort zone of typically the more marketing folks who've grown up in professional services.
But it's an interesting one in terms of taking that bet, and you touched on it with kind of digital and data. We are, and this is across all industries, right? We are now in a position where technology can actually start to give us that insight as to what's working, what isn't working, and really kind of prove in black and white on a spreadsheet that we spent X, that equal Y, which then increased this to do that. If we did more of this, you're going to get more and more at the top. As a firm, that's all good, right? And I think what is interesting in, dare I say it, is that there for me is a technical. I think this is broad brushstroke, so I'm not saying all firms are like this, and I think size of firm also dictates it. But there is a lack of knowledge in terms of what the art of the possible is today, from a technology perspective, from a reporting perspective. Now, okay, yes, I've had the advantage of being kind of a roving digital nomad for the last 5 years, which gives me time to consume all of this and learn what's happening. But part of me is I would want that skill set that is brand new in the market, so that you have that today. Whilst it might not be 100% relevant to today, it absolutely will be in 5 years, 5 years time. So this is things like data, AI, obviously, customer journey orchestration, those kind of technologies, customer data platforms, which CRM may well morph into. And the CRM as a technology platform is a really interesting kind of conversation bubbling up again within certainly the legal sector, because a certain brand's lifespan is probably coming towards the end. 2 other major organizations are out there, realize this, and are starting to come at it from a very different perspective. But when one talks to peers and former peers, it is interesting in terms of, I didn't even know that you could do this, to help drive that different conversation internally to a partner, whoever that, whatever industry is, to go, if I were able to produce this type of output, insight. Would that be helpful? Yes, it would. Well, in order for that to happen, this is what needs to happen internally to get to that point. But, you know, I reflect on our journey together way back when at BLP, when we were running those meeting reports that were looking forward every 2 weeks in the financial services piece, and having partners banging down my door going, why am I showing 0? And I'm like, because you're not pushing a button, or your EA is not pushing a button within Outlook to generate that report. It's not that difficult. And, you know, that going back to, well, that's not my job. And then the EA going, well, that's not my job. And I'm like, well, it's somebody's job. Has to be part of somebody's job description to do this, to generate this, you know, this basic outcome, let alone, you know, the data and insight that one can see today. So what, and you went through a merger, you've been in different, you know, different industries across this. What have you seen in that space?
So I completely agree with you there. I think there's some interesting topics that come out of there. So I'll start my super controversial bit. So I think that issue that you highlight about non-engagement of the non-BD people effectively, or lack of engagement from the non-BD people, is critical and still completely exists today. Mm-hmm. And I've been to many roundtables with CRM experts, and they all just basically bemoan that no one really engages, and that, you know, crap in, crap out data is the problem that they constantly have, and what can they do? But they never really think of actually what they need to do. They just think of, how do we make these partners, how do we make these associates, how do we make other people in the firm do our job for us? Mm-hmm. Which is kind of how I see it. And I think, well, that's just a crazy way of looking at it. And at my last place, I went, that's not what we're going to do at all. What we actually need to do is huge investment in digital platforms. We need to recognize that the way the digital world impacting us is massive. You're the last person in the world I have to educate or lecture on the use of LinkedIn for reach out. Literally the last person in the world, and you taught me most of what I know. And, you know, to this day, I find it extremely successful, you know, reaching out to people on LinkedIn. I've done it today. Extremely successful. And it's such a great tool. But in order to do that, do you really need everybody's data? Do you need everyone to cooperate? No. You don't. You need people to put a certain amount of data in the system, but actually you can get a huge amount of information, you know, from the email systems that you already have, from the data inputs that are coming into the firm already. And the issue is that people have gone through this, well, we need to ask permission all of the time. You know, we can't just use this data. You know, we need to ask permission. How does it work? Okay, there's some things you have to figure out. GDPR isn't simple. You have to figure out what you can and can't use and how you can use it. Of course, you have to remain compliant. You know, we're talking about professional services firms. You can't be non-compliant with law. So yeah, that's step one. But those things, I've done all that. Those things can be overcome. Unfortunately, I know a ridiculous amount about GDPR. It's a bit sad because of what I've had to learn about all of this. And it's amazing what consent, you know, you do really have, and how you can use the information. And the firms have a lot of data. And certainly if you use a CRM platform, probably as the core platform, but you do plug into it, you know, the people you already know using the systems you already have, the ingress you already have into your finance systems, into your CRM systems, into your email systems. You use a lot of data that you can buy in the industry that's out there about, you know, in the law firms, you know, what companies are spending and who's on their panels and that kind of thing. In the fund admin world, what funds are launching, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same. You know, there is industry information. It's expensive, but there's industry information you can use. And then you tie that in with LinkedIn and your contacts and Sales Navigator and who you're actually targeting and what you're trying to do. Those things alone provide you with massive amounts of data input, huge, easy, actionable bits of work, data that you can use. And that's really the future, because the 5 or 6 actionable pieces that come out of that are all probably worth 6-figure sums of money if people actually follow it up. And also, you know, you can follow it up, and you can either get the teams to do it, or you can get your BD teams to do it. But to me, the thing that holds things back at the moment is that the lack of confidence really in the IT solutions from within the CRM teams often, but often from the leaders in the marketing team, and indeed, you know, the board of the firms, who think, oh, you know, we must ask consent from everybody, and we can't just do this. And it's a nonsense, right? Because you go to any corporate, you know, you go to Salesforce or something like that. Yeah, they sit down at their desk in the morning and they open up Salesforce and they get on with it. And it's been like that for 20 years. Right? Yeah. It's not something they did 5 minutes ago. They've done it for 20 years. They put all of their data every day, all of their data just feeds into the system. so that they have comprehensive data. And it is absolutely standard at most corporates. Yeah, it just is.
Yeah.
But in the professional services world, for various reasons, and yeah, you do get complex reasons. Oh, we look after high net worth families, and we need to be careful of information. Yeah, there's always excuses. And you can always just cut teams off and not use their data if they're going to be really stroppy. So there's ways around it if you can be bold, but being bold is really critical. And today, being bold is really critical, because if you're not bold today, you will be very far behind in 5, 6, 7 years time, because the paradigm shift is now. The paradigm shift's been going on for the past 5 or 6 years. And you can miss it for, you've missed it for 5, 7 years, and people have sat there and gone, well, we missed it for 5, 7 years, doesn't really matter. Look at our results, speak for themselves, fantastic. We've solid 5.2% growth every year, as if that's impressive, and all these sorts of things. But actually, that won't last when the opposition go ahead of you quite substantially. I mean, a good example, a physical one that you can see is, look at how improved websites are for the really big corporates over the past 5 or 6 years. Really, really, it's good to see, right? Much simpler, much cleaner, much less information on them, much more accessible social media style. Many of the people who work in the industry have really got it, and there's some lovely things, really easy to use sites out there. Nearly all of them actually really, really focused. But that wasn't the case for the 10 years before. There was higgledy rubbish. There was, people who'd sat there and gone, well, my nephew built a website, so I'm going to get them to build a website for the firm because it's going to cost me thruppence halfpenny. And off they went and built some, unbelievable thing, sort of greening thing. And that, I wouldn't say that was standard, but that was out there, and that's all gone now. That's all gone. And if you're a firm and you don't have a decent website, that's the window of the firm, right? That's the shop. What do they buy? They buy the people, they buy the experience, they buy the quality of the brand. All of that is on show. And people have got that, and they've invested in it, and you can see that they've invested heavily in it. And I'm really glad to see that. The next stage is using that information again, using that data source that comes in properly. And the people are starting at it. Obviously, HubSpot's been around a long time. There's lots of technology that you and I can throw out there. But again, typically what you see is, you'll have HubSpot, and you'll go to a major firm, and they'll have one person who understands it.
Yeah.
If that, right? And they've normally left anyway. So, they'll have some newbie who's been past something half-assed, which isn't their fault, who might be super bright, but it's kind of one person, and they're kind of being lent on to use this information and generate campaigns. And it's a big ask for basically an under-resourced department. And then you just get people going, wow, these tools will cost a lot. We've got these people, we've got this technology, and how many leads is it really generated? And then it sort of spits out some data, and people go, it's generated all these leads, but how many have closed? And of course, it's too much for one person. So that's where I think, that's what I'm saying about the centers of excellence and the investment required, and the bravery on the data side to actually use the data you've got and to buy more data to make these tools effective as they should be, which is only really catching up with the corporate world. That's what just makes me laugh. It's just catching up with the corporate world. It's not as if the professional services industry is some kind of market leading entity here and no one else has thought of this. And it will happen. And the firms that will make a success of it, you will see, very good growth on the firms that make a success of it. Maybe double. Maybe they might double their average from where they were for a few years. What would always be hard, of course, is the partners to take credit for it. So it will always be hard to actually prove that it was actually the change in processes and systems that you had. You need to really convince the board that that's the answer, so that they actually agree with you at the end of it, and they don't just say, "Well, I think you'll find that my amazing knowledge and connections were really the driver here," which is what they always say. But to me, that's the crucial thing. Having that level of investment, being brave. Using the data that you have. I just think firms are sitting on data that they don't utilize in terms of BD, tons and tons of it that they don't really utilize. And partly because they don't employ enough people to utilize it, they don't have the systems, and they haven't really thought out carefully how to make the most use of it. And yes, it's taking baby steps, but what I see is that the baby steps are still being taken. These babies should be teenagers by now, and they're not. They're still toddling around as if they're 2 years old, going, oh, well, we've had an event and we've invited some people and we tracked it on HubSpot. Yeah, we tracked that they're coming. and then someone's come and it's amazing, and now we're going to follow up with them. It's like, yeah, great, but guys, you could have done this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And in fact, you were doing it 10 years ago and you haven't really come on, but the technology's really changed, the data's really changed, the people have all changed, and the market you're selling into is completely changed because now everyone buys digitally. Especially since the pandemic, right? We haven't even got into that. Since the pandemic, everyone's buying on Zoom, everyone's buying digitally. The professional services sales must be approaching 70-80% digital by now on the new side. Must be.
You're right, and it's interesting in terms of so much to kind of cover off there, but that's where I believe, back to your point around seeing people, tried and tested sales directors coming in from industry into professional services and fundamentally failing because they don't understand the business, and it is nuanced. If you haven't worked in professional services, it's very hard to explain the difference between a corporate and pro service. However, I do believe, to your point, absolutely, that we could be doing a much better job of using technology to its maximum, or even 50% of its capability. Let's take that HubSpot example. It's around, how do you then look at automation? How do you look at what is called the waterfall in marketing, so that the minute everybody that turned up to the event or attended the event on Zoom or Teams, the system knows it, right? So they have an automated email follow-up straight out the gate when the thing finishes. Those that didn't attend, they didn't attend because they didn't attend. You might have another automated email which goes straight out with some different information, and then the system just takes over that lead nurturing, if you will, to a point that then it becomes something. But you then need somebody, a human being, when it becomes something, to then do something with that that piece of information, rather than looking and going, oh, that's nice, and then just forgetting about it. So, and also to your point around the way that people buy and experience, somebody shared with me the other day that one of the big four, I won't say who, are trying to create an almost Amazon-like experience when you land on their website. Because that's just kind of how we are used to buying, right? Almost. It's just as whether you're the chief exec of a FTSE 100 organization or someone who's got a startup idea, we live in the Amazons, the Ubers, the Airbnbs of the world that drive an experience that now comes to expect. And there's a partner at A&O who I know very well who drills into his associates and senior associates and so on that we're selling an experience. And they say that they look at me like I've got two heads. Like, what? No, we sell law. So no, we don't. Any other magic circle firms could do what we do. Any of them could. So we need to differentiate ourselves. And what is that?
And as we always tell Alex, you can't really sell the law. It's all in books already. It all exists, right? The government have published it and everything, right? It's actually free. You're not really selling a law, are you? You're only selling your knowledge and interpretation of it. Yeah, it's an interesting concept, often forgotten, that they think they actually know something magic, which I can actually look up.
But if I look at then the age profile of that partner, he's under 40. This is also, for me, the next generation of lawyer coming through, which get this, and the clients that they're also engaging with. Someone the other day says to me, the average CEO in tech world is now 32 or 33. If you're going to market to a 32, 33-year-old in the tech world to buy your, and let's, CEOs are part of that buying committee, right? You need to be talking to them in a very, very different way. They don't want things printed. They don't expect things to be printed out. They expect to engage with you in a digital format, and that again requires a huge shift in thinking, behavior, adoption of cloud. Can't put things in the cloud because our clients won't let us type sort of conversation. So, but to your point, it comes back to, if you're able to invest in the expertise during that entire, it's almost, I guess, you almost, in my view, want to unpick the entire buying journey, if you can, of what you sell, and then figure out, where do I need a human, and where do I need the lawyer, or where do I need the professional, where do I need BD, where do I need marketing, where do I need data, where do I need automation, and then look at your own tech stack, but your own people skills as well, to figure out who can do what. And that might mean some tough conversations for some law firms over the next 5 years. They just don't have the right skill set, and the people that are in those businesses don't want to change or adapt to the new world order. So unfortunately, in the great resignation, the great reshuffle is obviously all being, is being talked about at the moment. So, it's there is no single answer in this, because no one's really getting it right across all industries. But to your point, if I look at SaaS world and the world of sales enablement platforms like the Outreaches and the Salesloft, both of which got billion-dollar valuations during the height of a global pandemic, kind of shows either VC money is crazy or where they believe kind of top of funnel selling is going to go. If you talked about any of those brands where we've come from, they would have never ever have heard for them. Yet in 5 years' time, this might be table stakes for what professional services do. So there's a lot there. But if anybody's listening to this and they think, actually, we want to be bold, we want to be brave, this has inspired me to kind of try and do something different. In your experience, Dominic, where's a good place to start? Back to basics.
Yeah, I think a really good place to start, and it's something that happened rarely to me. The 4 or 5 companies I've worked at, is for the board on one of their away days to actually take some ownership of this stuff. And they have plenty of management away days. I've organised enough of them to know that there are plenty of them, and attended enough of them to know that there are plenty of them. And often I think that what you see happen in the whole of BD and marketing is it's relegated to a kind of, it's business services, it's a special subject, it has the same profile internally as, what IT systems we're going to use or how we're going to manage our HR teams, which isn't to say that it is more important, but it's seen in a specific way as a specific small subunit within the business. Mm-hmm. But actually, that's right year to year. But when you're setting a strategy for it, when you're actually thinking about making a big change, that change absolutely has to come from the top. And that means the top having a little more education from someone like yourself, typically Alex, who's very good at it, a little bit more education about what the art of the possible is and where the world is, where we've been from, where we're going. And then some commitment to drive that change through. Because without that commitment from the top, both in terms of budgets, because it is a budget thing, but also that change that needs to happen. And to your point, if you ask the partners what do they want from marketing and BD, typically they want another person who they can just allocate all the stuff they don't want to do. Oh, can you write my speech for when I go and do that presentation? Can you organise this event for me that I can speak at? Can you sort this dinner out for me? Oh, can you reply to this RFP? They just want someone generic who can be a bit of a jack of all trades. Going back to that conversation earlier, that's just a complete fail. It's just a fail. Yeah. You fill your business full of people who are very willing, very keen, often very bright, enthusiastic people who you then train to become jack of all trades. Then that's what you end up with as a corporate culture. You just have this corporate culture of nothing particularly exciting, but everything getting done. Mm-hmm. And if you want to change that, you change it from the top, and you actually have to stop that. To your point, you probably have to make some changes in the type of people you hire. You probably have to make some changes in the type of roles you have available. And you probably have to actually think hard about your tech stack and what you're going to invest in. And then again, what that means for who you're hiring and the types of people you're hiring. And then, what you're going to do on the relationship side, who's actually going to follow up these leads and stuff. Because again, if you think that the partners and associates are going to do it, that's where we come full circle back to, do you need salespeople? Yeah, you need a few. You need a few people with those skills, because it's not really the skill set of the group of introverts that you've hired who are, naturally your lawyers and accountants, typical types, to go and do this. And so you probably do need a handful of people to lead this at the front end, even if actually what they're doing is more a kind of first stage cycling through of opportunities before handing them over to the people who can actually close. They might not necessarily be the big closers themselves, but you probably do need a group of people doing that, or else you'll do what a lot of firms currently do, which is generate a whole load of leads, show the partners that they're generating all these leads, but generate 0 closures.
Yeah.
And have the marketing teams hunting around, BD teams hunting around, trying to prove that they've closed something, only to be told that, I'm not sure you really did that. And that really affects their ROI and all of that. But for me, I think, really starting at the top, taking a little, doesn't take days and days, but just taking a little bit of time to think clearly about where you want to be in 5 years, and then getting the right person, setting them that task and setting them off on the way. And then not, you don't have to interfere daily, but you do have to lead. You do have to lead. Again, I mean, look, it's a minor example. Most CRM systems aren't used very well by law firms. That's just typical, right? Or accountancy firms. And at the same time, the people who don't use them the most are the senior people, because they're too busy and they're too important and they don't use them. And it's absolutely the reason they don't get used, because from the top down, that's what happens. I'm too important to use it. So the person who reports to me, well, they're too important to use it as well. And so it goes on until no one's used it. And you haven't really succeeded. So that buy-in from the top into that cultural change is critical. And yeah, absolutely can be done, because, I'm sure you in particular can talk about some excellent firms, and we've mentioned there now, and I know there's others as well. Yeah, there's some firms that have really got to grips and really improved what they've done, and we've discussed websites and things and how they've come on leaps and bounds. So all of this stuff is definitely doable, but you need to put the time aside and make some commitment to actually do it, and you'll see the real returns. I think for most firms, a real investment in proper BD structure combined with marketing, focused on digital, focused on improving your top line as the main goal, we'll probably see, I mean, certainly my experience from what I've achieved, probably see you double the annual revenue increases of the firm over a 5-year period. And that, if you're a bigger firm, even if you're a smaller firm, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of money, it's a lot of success. And as we all know, success drives success. If you keep the firm growing, people are happy, they're getting paid, the partnership, pool is bigger, and they're getting their shares, everybody's happy, and that's what you want. So it doesn't just drive a kind of cold commercial increase in profits and all of these things. Those things drive a happy business, because there are very few businesses that are growing rapidly where everybody's severely unhappy. I mean, they do exist, but they're pretty rare. There is a lot of businesses where growth is stalled or is falling, if not growth, actually, and actually shrinking, where the culture is really hard. It's hard to maintain. It's hard to keep everybody motivated. So this investment, it's not just about the BD, it's about the culture of the firm as a whole.
Be bold, be brave, start from the top, and as always, it's about the culture, what it fundamentally comes down to. But now you've got data that can potentially start to underpin and drive some of this. Dominic, as always, it's an absolute pleasure talking to you. I always learn something new when I chat with you and catch up with you. If people want to learn more about what you're doing and what you can potentially do for them, where's the best place for them to find you?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn, Alex, as always. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll
put the link somewhere here. I've done this YouTube thing right. I'm pointing randomly in a square box, but absolutely do. Of course, mention this podcast and say that you've listened to it. Reach out to Dominic, connect with Dominic. He really is. I was going to say the godfather of all BD in terms of it really does know his stuff and brings some amazing experience to bear. So it's absolutely well worth it. For my guests that are listening, thank you as always. If there's my guests that are listening, my audience that is listening, thank you as always. If you want to be on the podcast, you know what to do. If you want to suggest someone to be on the podcast, you know what to do. But otherwise, I will leave you all here today with that final thought: be bold and be brave. Dominic, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure, Alex. Thank you.